Yo, how's it going, folks? Welcome to episode 163 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Hope you're keeping well. Hope you're having a wonderful week. Hope you're enjoying the fact that it is getting a little bit brighter, a little bit warmer. We're getting ever closer. I was saying that it is likely to snow, I think, in the north over the next few days. So make of that what you will. This fucked up weather doesn't know what it wants, but I can't really blame it because I don't know what I want half the time. So, hey ho. We've got some bits of news that I wanted to kind of discuss. Good few articles, actually, but I've laid out a bit of a framework with today's guest. And we're gonna, what's the word? Weave it all together into a nice little narrative here. So I'm not going to waffle on too much. We're going to, jump straight into introducing today's guest, who is back for, I think, third or fourth time. I was struggling to figure out how many this morning when I was counting them back. But yeah, today's guest is the founder of Global Cannabinoid Solutions, the UK's first cannabis science agency, the author of the Cannabis Crash Course and the Canna Manual, and the host of the Cannaman Podcast. They are Chris Tasker. How are you doing, brother?
Wonderful, Simpa. Thank you. Very happy. Great way to start the week. A lovely podcast and spirited conversation with you, Simpa. So thank you for having me, and excited to talk about some of the cool topics that you've picked out for us as well. So should be a good conversation.
Indeed, indeed, yes. Sort of for anyone that wants to be informed there, I mean, Chris have had a nice lively sort of back and forth for the past hour, as we often do. I think probably discussing more politics than we do on the podcast. So we're going to park that a bit. We're going to stick with the science. We're going to try and delve into, like I said, some of the recent surveys and stuff that's come out. There's a few different things that are being championed by the media as always spun in a way that is like cannabis is the devil, while also being this magical miracle drug when you buy it from the right people, as it were. Big air quotes, the right people. But yeah, before we delve into that, I suppose it's been a good year since we spoke. I think January 2024 will be the last time we publicly spoke. So what you been up to? What you been doing for the past sort of
Ooh.
13 months?
I ask myself that question sometimes, Simpa. Expanding the agency, basically. So with the growing interest in the cannabis industry, lots of new people joining the sector, lots of new ideas, problems, and innovations that are sort of sprouting out, and sort of talking points that have popped up. And so we're finding all sorts of cool new applications for some of our scientific services that we've been providing, primarily the training resources that we've got and the knowledge base, our sort of networking tools and resources that we've got, a cool new community that people can join for free at cannabissciencetrain.com. And then thirdly, finding cool new applications for some of our lovely research colleagues and experts in cannabinoid science. So with all of that, there's been quite a lot going on, and we're just trying to find cool, new, faster, more interesting ways to serve the cannabis industry, and then also support the public with the public debate that's going on as well. So obviously, we like to try and provide as much information and context as we can to current events and industry discussions as well. And so I think we'll touch on some of those in a little bit. But overall, just meeting more new, lovely people, solving cool, new, interesting problems, and finding new, interesting applications for cannabinoid science and research. So I think we'll talk, a bit more about some of those, and maybe dig into some of the other dynamics. But come and have a look and check out our website if you're interested. But I think, you'll get a good dose of science today. And I think Simpa's been warming up some good studies for us to dig into as well, because there's quite a lot of intersection that we're seeing at the moment between science, industry, society, and sort of public perspectives, and the news and media as well. So my favorite
Hmm.
subject. Thank you,
Indeed.
Simpa.
No, yeah, very, very concise, very precise. I like it. I like it. Uh, yeah, you raised a valid point there about sort of the interpretation or the perception of these studies and the into different interpretations of what they mean and how they fit into different ideological frameworks. Some people look at these and go, "Ha, that proves our thesis. It's the worst thing ever." Somebody goes, "Ah, well, no, that actually means this," or "No, that means this." We're losing the touchstone of science. I feel culturally, it's weird. We don't trust science generally, um, but it's odd because cannabis is a new science in a lot of ways. It's an old plant, an ancient plant, but a lot of the science is quite new. But it seems to be being processed through a prejudicial lens. This historic prohibitive sort of mindset is then looking at all of this mountains of data, as we spoke over the Canada with Dr. Riley Kirk the other week. It's the most studied plant in the world, literally mountains of data, and they go, well, all of this says it's bad, or I have to see that it says it's bad. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to get your opinion on a few of these things and to delve into maybe why culturally we have these approaches, these perceptions of certain things, and why they may be changing. I think is a very interesting one. The financial motive is a big one, obviously, which I think leads quite interestingly into then. I think we did this as a second question last time. We'll do it again. Bit 6.25, 6 and a bit years in now to changes in the law in UK and prescribing. You and I have both had very heated conversations, both quite opinionated on it. Often our opinions align on it, I would think. But I just wanted to have a discussion about what we're now seeing from the community itself as well. I feel there's a lot more patients becoming active, trying to hold the system accountable, whereas before it kind of felt like they had the rose-tinted glasses on of going, well, I'm safe now, though. It doesn't matter that it's not good enough. It's safe. Whereas now I feel like there's more people trying to hold the industry accountable, which is obviously something you spend your day to day doing through your work. So I just wanted your thoughts and feelings about sort of where we're at. The good, the bad, the ugly, as it were.
I think we've seen a bit of as the timelines evolved, there's definitely been a change in that opinion that you mentioned there of the new solutions being presented to the public, and for the meantime, people are happy, think, oh yeah, this is it, problem solved. A lot of the families that campaigned thought, oh, this is great. We're going to start progressing things. We might be able to get access. Oh, this might help me without having to pay thousands of pounds in financial bills and medical bills. And then as well, that protection that a lot of people thought they were going to get from prescriptions hasn't quite materialized. And so a lot of the core problems that people thought were being addressed subsequently over the last couple of years have sort of not panned out quite the way it was promised. And then we found new problems with that stepping stone of a solution is what I'd probably call it. It didn't address all of the actual needs of the public and the public health concerns, but it did semi align with the requirements of an industry and other industries that had popped up previous to the British cannabis industry sort of establishing itself in 2019. So I think now, and what we're seeing with a lot of the public debate, and particularly say the hearings, I don't know if that's the right language, but the parliamentary discussions that happened earlier this month with medical cannabis being at the forefront and patient access and all these problems being discussed in Parliament and not really acknowledged or addressed, seems to have subsequently spiraled out into a more public online discussion around, well, this isn't good enough. And it seems as though a lot of the holes in the current medical cannabis system are being sort of highlighted, not just the quality of the medicines and products that are maybe being prescribed, but then also the accuracy and efficacy of some of those treatments. And so there's the actual delivery of the service, but then there's I think the patient's wider quality of life around that, which also hasn't improved particularly. And so I think a lot of people saw this law change in 2019 as being the UK is on the map. This is the problem solved. Our government's going to get this under control and we're going to have great solutions basically for the medical demand and the public health demand and the industrial demand as well. But it seems as though people are leaning more towards it just being the industrial demand that was satisfied, and a lot of those same public issues and public health questions still sort of pervade and prevail. And I think that's what we're seeing sort of transpire online, particularly with the families that have to pay a lot of money for some of these treatments and their lives depend on those treatments versus some of those that just feel like giving it a try and maybe aren't as life-threateningly dependent on those products and these medicines. And so I think there's a bit of a spectrum on the patient side of things, like chronic disease support and long-term quality of life and helping with the symptom management versus, say, immediate short-term need, kids potentially dying from the hundreds of seizures that they're having a month versus, say, the short-term alleviation of some arthritis or something else like that. So there's obviously a spectrum of severity and life-threatening, urgent requirements within that patient spectrum as well. And obviously there are elements of the industry that would love to solve that and are trying their best to solve some of those demands, but also then there's the wider ecosystem that's got other decisions, market forces, and then lobbying power as well, who's actually, although maybe more competent and could solve that problem, but then maybe doesn't have the resources to be able to compete in terms of affecting the world in terms of steering the ecosystem in that direction. So there's definitely something to be said for having plenty of funding and having lots of money to be able to get the work done that you need to get done. But then also, I think that's where we've maybe lost ourselves in the overall cannabis ecosystem in the UK as it stands today. And I think people are slowly cluing into that and sort of seeing that. And that sort of brings us to where we are today, I suppose.
Nice. You raised some very valid points there. I'm reminded of, and I can't think, I was trying to rack my brains the whole way through when you were talking of who the hell said it, but somebody said that we've created like a quasi recreational system here in the UK.
Maybe
Somebody,
I share that perspective
and,
to some degree.
and it's not necessarily through, even if that was the intention, even though you and I have sat in meetings and been to expos and whatever else, and we've met quite a lot of the medical people, not all of them, but quite a few of them that are what do you call them? Subsidiary? A subsidiary of a larger, like a multinational entity that is a air quotes recreational company in one region that is then representing themselves as purely a medical in another region. And we can often quite see through what they're trying to do in terms of their lobbying efforts, in terms of them getting a foot in the door, as it were. I think you raise a valid point in that, and this is where, if I had my tinfoil hat on, I feel the whole system was always about the lie rather than trying to actually give patients access. It was about then, no, how much do they make from selling weed? We could make money from selling weed. Because, as you said, the imperative on the system being air quotes successful under a neoliberal capitalist paradigm is quarterly profits increase, share prices go up, industry increases, number of users, etc. That's the metric by which all success is measured. That's how. What the hell was that company called? Nividin, the American
Nvidia?
Nvidia. Yeah, that ended up worth what it was worth. And these other companies, as soon as see this jump of people jump onto something or start using something, or their service price increasing over X amount of time, that's then calculated to be this over time, so everyone wants in on it. And so I think we've seen people jumping into the cannabis, but it's not because of the kids with, again, rare, the big word there, rare forms of epilepsy, rare diseases. Rare equals not many treatments and protocols. You sort the 10,000, the 5,000, the whatever thousand of these people. That's a done market. What's the point of creating a bespoke medication for that, putting billions into research and development? Do you know what I mean? It's that's not a priority when you can just. I'm not accusing the clinics of this. I'm not being the Daily Mail, but we were just talking about this article. There is a narrative from some people that could be made, and in some way I agree but disagree with their intention of saying it was deliberate all along, or maybe not. I don't know anymore. That anxiety is so easy to diagnose. Depression, so easy to diagnose. The plethora of treatments that are available short term that you can take through the traditional process, which gives you the qualifying criteria for these private for profit clinics. And so I feel like that then if there's X amount of millions of people and we're all getting ever more anxious, we're an anxious species now. Like the security of our future is disappearing beneath us. Most people don't have the financial security that previous generations did. So this is again something that will increase. So if we can get 10,000 this year, next year there'll be another 5,000 people we can get on board, then another five, then another 10. Do you know? So it's just they're putting the money into growth markets, as it were, to use their language. And frankly, childhood diseases for XYZ isn't a growth market for them, even though that's the promises that they made, even though they brought the families down and they paraded them and they weaponized the emotive response that the public had to pass legislation that they promised would help and protect these people. But as you say, hundreds of families are still going bankrupt. They're remortgaging homes. They're having to get rid of generational wealth in a moment, this generation, in this moment, to keep their family lineage alive, if you want to look at it like that. It's an insane fucking position in the country that has the National Health Service. Again, I've never understood that if you were going to do it, if it wasn't then about creating this pseudo market, why you didn't bring that straight in the NHS and go, okay, we'll fund it through this. That is the logical thing to me of what should have happened. But the fact that then it became this for-profit thing, it's the same with, as we looked at with Cali Seaman the other week, ketamine infusion private clinics. Like there is all sorts of things now because of the way they adjusted the dangerous drugs laws, that if you can get the protocols to hold the drug, to transport the drug, and to issue the drug, you can basically create treatment centers for anything on paper in this country. It's just a matter of time before people actually roll them out now. Yet at the same time, the war on drugs pervades on the other side. And it feels like the system benefits both sides from this, from having the control of the war on drugs while making money from selling the drugs. And again, I don't know whether it was intentional of the way this paradigm was designed, or whether it's just become maladaptive over time. And it just, like you said, money goes towards where money is made. So we'll make money there, we'll put money there. I genuinely don't know anymore. I look at it with just such a sense of it's villainous. It feels exploitative. It feels like racketeering. It feels like the mob boss being like, it's a nice life you got. You're ashamed if somebody, took your license or got you sacked. Do you know what I mean? I can't help but feel it's a form of control while they're profiteering at the same time, while also then being able to perpetuate a paradigm that if you don't have a prescription, you're a bad cannabis consumer. You're one of the bad ones. You're the reason my system isn't as good because of you people undermining it. It's a mental paradigm, like I said. So I appreciate your thoughts on it and your input. And
Mm.
another question actually I'd like to ask, because it was something again I discussed with Callie last week. Should we be prescribing flower with the variability of it, the inconsistency of it? And I say that even as a grower, the inconsistency of plant to plant, even from clone to clone, because of environmental changes and nutrient changes, etc. Like it's modern pharmacology and modern medicine is based on basically single molecule, single response. Granted, you have that pull out massive sheet of paper with all the potential side effects, but in the general sense, they've made this to do X in the consumer. And cannabis flower doesn't fit into that paradigm, and the doctors don't know, and they can't know because you and I could smoke the same, like cultivar rich in three terpenes and have a complete different response. Like they could be listed as these are anxiolytic, these will reduce anxiety in you, but somebody could consume limonene and be chill and calm, relaxed. Somebody else could smoke and be jittery. Do you know what I mean? The thoughts racing and the tachycardic, palm sweating. Like people have different responses, and we can't know and we can't standardize that information because even the company you're buying it from, they're saying, "Oh, this is green crack." When I went, bad example of green crack, but,
Wow.
but when I was in,
Symbolic.
but when I was in America, and I drove around state to state, wildly different cultivars, yet they were all, "Oh, this is our green crack," listed as indica in Colorado, listed as sativa in Oregon, listed as I cannot pull it out of my brain, 20 something in Oregon, 20 yeah, like different num do you know what I mean? It's but stating that it's the same name, but the name can't relate to that in the same way when you get a batch of seeds, five different plants, five different like phenotypes, and even within them there's variability, like I said, from the positioning in the grow room, the interaction with the microbacterials. There's so many of the variables that make it antithetical to the modern, sorry, pharmacological paradigm. So yeah, and that's not to say I want people to be protected and whatever. I think we should be defended by decriminalization. I'm not saying take away the toys of the people who are protected now. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the way to actually give the kids access, in my opinion, is to make sure that, like you said, the ones that will die without it their first priority, surely. And then you just decriminalize these people to figure it out as we go, and we can do that.
Touched on some good points there, Simba. I was thinking deeply. I think overall, and I talked about this a couple of days ago actually with someone else. Health inequality is maybe the best label to describe it at the moment. There is an emergent medical need that's not being met because of a sort of financial barrier of sorts and a regulatory avoidance of decision making, perhaps as well. And you make a good, like, the key question is, that is a golden question, really. Should we be prescribing cannabis flower to patients? As a whole, it's a crude way of delivering potentially therapeutic elements into the body, which is the opposite, as you rightly stated, of what we traditionally do in most medical scenarios. So already it's an exception. But the next question is well, we know cannabis isn't one stationary, identical compound. It's a collection of hundreds of different compounds and chemical elements that all have very varying and sort of interchangeable effects almost depending on the individual that they're applied to. So we've chosen immediately probably one of the most crude, complex, hard to justify ways of prescribing cannabis. Yes, you can have maybe not prescribing cannabis, but of administering cannabinoids to the body. It's fast, it's effective, but massively inaccurate. And the way I sort of help people like translate this for people is it's like carpet bombing versus a precise missile strike, let's say. And so a lot of it's hard to narrow down what the benefits and which elements of that cannabis sample were beneficial and which were actually contributing to the unwanted effects or side effects or potentially causing more harm than good, potentially. And so I think there's a lot of complacency around what's actually in cannabis flower as a whole that's prescribed or not prescribed. And then also how that's stored, how that's delivered, where it comes from, what's actually in it, how variable are the actual proportions of all the various compounds that are in there. And as you say, week to week, day to day, location to location, might have the same name, might be the same strain, supposedly, might have a very close genetic profile, but it can be completely different in terms of like its medical and physiological effects on the body. So it's a far more nuanced conversation than the general media article will lead you to believe. And there is a argument as well to be made there that the recreational influences from pre-prohibition, let's say, where people have just grown it at home, given it a name, grown it in their field, given it a name. The names are made up for the most part and are pretty interchangeable. As you rightly mentioned, you can go to one source in America, state to state, same name, completely different crop, can be grown in different soils, it can be given different amounts of light and nutrients, proximity to other plants, altitude, the amount of water you give it, everything affects then the later chemical production of that crop or flower. And within that production process and then packaging it and sending it and posting it and then the patient consuming it, there's so many chemical transformations that take place that we absolutely can't legislate for. Mm-hmm. Whether that be from just like the heat and temperature changes from it being stored or packaged in the facility where it's tested through to by the time it gets to the patient that's consuming it. So it's certainly not the smartest way that we could have approached it. And there are plenty of countries that just don't allow flower prescribing. I know Brazil, great example. They just prescribe oils. They don't allow the flower to be prescribed in any way. It has to be a transformed product of the plant. And so that makes it a lot easier for doctors, because then they don't have to play around with the strain names. They can just talk about pure chemical elements that are inside that product and talk pretty objectively about the effects of those individual compounds then. Whereas the way we've chosen to approach it is very flagrant, maybe in the way that it's been delivered and packaged up and promised. It semi appears to the regular recreational consumer, but then also semi addresses the medical necessity that's there too amongst the patient population. So you've got these sort of two perspectives on it. And then scientifically speaking, both sides are semi-correct in that it is safe, it has benefits, it's a good way of administering things, but it's lacks the precision. And so this is where the typical pharmaceutical organization or someone that's more drug developmentally minded, I think I might have created a word there, Simpa, but they're going to be incredibly averse to that process of carpet bombing the body and hoping for the best. For the general pain management, someone who's on many, many drugs, many, many opioids, and nothing helps, I think it's a fair application. And then when we are actually trying to get people to reduce their dependency on other drugs, that's a great application. But I think we do get lost, and it's easy to then manipulate. And I think many doctors will actively acknowledge this too. It is very easy for patients and people that maybe have drug-seeking behavior or potential, whether you agree with that drug-seeking or not and why they're doing it, what they want, when pain scores are self-reported or when you've got to pass like tests where you just answer questions, you get people that do then want to try that system and see whether they can get in with a simple justification. And we do have a loosening then of what's wholly measurably objectively medical versus what is subjectively medical. And a lot of the pain scoring and a lot of disease scoring is around self-reported. Yeah, my knee's on fire. We can't trace it down. We can't say you've got a specific deficiency, but I've got excruciating pain in my knee, for example. No one can tell you if your knee's being split apart in terms of pain scores or not. And so that's sort of the difficulty that everyone's trying to navigate at the moment, is what's true, what's not. They're saying this, they're saying that. But when you get back down to it objectively, I need to cut my dirty coughs there, Simpa. That divergence almost of objectively cannabinoids can have specific effects in specific tissues, in specific conditions in the lab, can't necessarily be applied to the cannabis conversation when it gets to that sort of patient-doctor interaction, because there's a lot of different variables there that can't be controlled like they are in a lab. And so at a certain point, going back to your decriminalization topic, how do we just say, hey, look, well, we can't regulate any of that because we don't really know. All we know is that it's not going to kill you instantly when you do take it, and you can probably have a pretty good quality of life long term, and it's arguably not damaged the public health of many nations around the world when they have walked away and said, hey, look, we're not going to get involved in those micro minutiae of what's good for you and what's not. It is a bit more of a philosophical conversation, but we've come in with a very firm approach of you're allowed certain compounds into your biology and you're not allowed other compounds into your biological system. That's where it gets a bit, for me, as a citizen of the world, I think that is a bit of a strange, slippery slope that we go down of regulating chemistry of the planet versus, which has its good applications, don't get me wrong, I don't want cyanide in my burgers, for example. But at the same time, this is why we're having a lot of problems, and a lot of the patients don't feel as though, and the public don't feel as though our current cannabis policy does us justice, is that people just want to be able to consume and put in their bodies what they want to put in their bodies. They want good safety information. They want good, reliable guidance on how to do that if they do want to experiment with their bodies. But it does also become a bit of a bodily autonomy conversation. And as we've talked about with Seed Our Future and what Guy's been doing, there is very much a UN right to health, in that because this system is so restrictive financially, it has its own barriers, and there is a bit of a blatant health inequality there, both in terms of access, affordability, and application. Why then would it not make sense to decriminalize that whole scenario and just let people produce their own and support themselves independently where possible, and then open up more time and focus for doctors to provide more precision treatment, so that you don't get that mix of people just want to consume it and they're blocking up the actual medical system, and then people that actually need it can't get the access because that system doesn't quite work for them. And I think maybe we need less systems and a bit more education around the whole conversation nationally, rather than force it into, I think the doctors have got enough on their plates already. Most doctors that I've seen in the interviews on the NHS, for example, or where they've sort of surveyed GPs, is that they've got enough on their plate already in terms of new drugs, special licensed medicines and unlicensed specials, and different drug combinations that they can use and can't use. They don't want to be thinking about a whole new category of drug for the most part. A lot of patients and doctors were just like, I would prefer that they had a clean source, a happy place, a logical, safe way of consuming these drugs, if they are going to do it, and the reliable information and guidance around it, so that people aren't so dependent on doctors for everything. So I think there is also then, at a higher level, again, going back to the philosophical side, like, are we over medicalizing everything? Which there is a pretty significant conversation around scientifically as well. And this is what, again, is a bit of a discussion that links into some of the autism and ADHD diagnoses. Are we over medicalizing everything, and maybe not everyone needs to take a drug for something? And so that's another sort of tangential paradigm that's going on in the background, and at a sort of another fundamental conversation as well, is, do doctors really need to be involved in who consumes cannabinoids and who doesn't, especially if we're just going to give them cannabis flowers, and especially if we don't actually know what's going to be going on. I think we are limiting potential drug interactions and people mixing medications with cannabis, which is a good thing. But I think there's a lot more that can be done overall by the industry, by the clinics, to sort of self-regulate and be a bit more transparent around what their prescribing criteria are. I don't know how much cross-referencing gets done, or how much that's scrutinized by outside sources. I know there are vetting procedures. I know there are, let's say, compliance checks that need to be made, which is great. But with cannabis being as unique and uncharted as it is, for a lot of these private clinics, there isn't specific guidance around a lot of that interaction, let's say, medically. And what I mean by that is, most medical interactions in the NHS, there are nice guidelines for. National Institute of Healthcare Excellence spell it out exactly what more or less a doctor can or can't do for a certain symptom. Cannabis, there's almost none of that guidance around, really, and particularly when it comes down to prescribing cannabis flowers, it's really in the wheelhouse of the doctors to be able to decide what they think's best for those patients. And again, there's so little there scientifically to be able to say with any specificity this strain's going to be better than that strain, because it's got the same compounds in it, just in slightly different ratios, for example. So are we over medicalizing some of those conversations and avoiding or mixing that up perhaps with more of a decriminalization dialing back of the responsibility on doctors to say the responsibility on the public to conduct themselves safely, proportionally, and in a way that protects their health and well-being as well. So again, doctors can't legislate for everything. They can't predict your entire life. They can't. It's not as binary as anyone would love it to be. And so you can see why a lot of countries have just gone, oh, well, look, we'll just decriminalize it and sort out what happens, basically, and put some public health measures in place. We'll put in some education, some harm reduction measures. And a lot of the time they've seen youth crime go down because there's not as many youths getting caught in the criminal system for cannabis possession, etc. They'll see a reduction in opiate use. Those are some of the classic combos. And so maybe that's our next step is, hey, we start decriminalizing some of this and start opening some of this up, or we start being a bit more transparent. Obviously, the government's not got a lot of time at the moment. It's got bigger fish to fry and economies to grow. But I think a lot of our regulations, particularly cannabis regulations, are not helping the growth of the cannabis industry at all. And if anything, it's still incredibly difficult to do anything legally, even if you are following the law, just because of the strict scheduling around general cannabis anyway. So I think that if we do less, deregulate, and I say deregulate, but educate, I think there's a lot that could be benefited from. And also you're giving people a lot more options. You're giving doctors a lot less to worry about as well. It becomes a bit more of a simplified job for them because they don't have as many people there that are trying to benefit recreationally or potentially throw spanners in the system. So I think maybe we need to do a bit less on a national level for the public, and then a bit more when it comes to actually regulating that small group of clinics that do exist. Because there are a lot of very legitimate concerns around private healthcare and private clinics in the first place. Not just cannabis. A lot of them have done some very terrible things. And so I think they're rightly scrutinized. And there are a lot of also good actors in there that do genuinely want to deliver good medical health care. And it's a shame that a lot of them are also being suppressed by our sort of just inefficient systems that are there, and maybe our messy, over politicized approaches to the same science and the same objective facts. And so maybe there's a way to like academically outsource all of this to GCS and we could design it for them. But for the most part, I don't think there's actually that much work to be done. It's just some clear guidance and leadership from those in power, or at the very least from our industry, and they can say amongst them the best proposal wins or something. I think there's got to be a certain point, like there's got to be some bidding and creativity, and I don't think we need the government to legislate everything for our sector. I think we could present some solutions and say this is what we want, this would be the best way to solve things, and that would be the best way for us as a sector to maybe address the situation, which I'm sure is already underway, and I know is underway in different ways. But I think that's the path forward, is like industries leading themselves rather than waiting for the government to tell us what to do and what we can do, can't do. It's like, don't break the law, but here's our innovative solutions to the problems that we're seeing, and here's how we'd like your support in solving them, essentially. So that's my grand assessment there for you, Simpa, on that conversation. But I can see another long couple of years for families and patients who are struggling with some of this and that need reliable support or maybe can't afford it. Prices are coming down, but I don't think, again, overall, that crude cannabis prescriptions are going to be the answer to a lot of those patients' needs for the most part.
It's a
crude carpet bomb approach for now, and so it's certainly not the be all and end all. There's a long way for it to go to start catching up to the actual scientific consensus and knowledge that's available at the moment. Like, we're a long way behind overall.
Nice. You covered quite a lot there. Where do I want to begin in my head here? Yeah, I feel like it's the people who are in the industry are in a room pushing doors blindly, and whatever door opens, they all run through into the next room, and then they start pushing doors again, and then another door opens, and they're pushing into the next room. And it doesn't matter what the doors are labeled. It doesn't matter what's in the room or what was in the other rooms that would have opened up if they'd have just waited. It's irrelevant to them. Progress is progress. Money is money. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why this industry hasn't subsidized these families, why the clinics don't use this money to fucking sort that out. Why instead of spending all this money on influencers on social media to go, hey, did you know in 2018 the law changed? And this bullshit skirting around the edges just to again increase their numbers of going, we got 5,000 more patients. Round C investment, fucking here we go, lads, get it in. Like,
Mm.
it's not. Whereas again, like you said, it's a stopgap for those families. Give them it now, invest in research, and find out why and how it helps. Because I don't want children smoking joints. We don't necessarily need them, like you say, off the tits on oil. Like, do you know what I mean? If we're then, like I said, doing the carpet bomb, if we find out, no, 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 actually, it was this terpene, this flavonoid, this really weird sequester terpene element, but only when it oxidizes plus this, boom, job done. Like, with this, cannabis is so many fucking things, and the West has just gone, cannabis is CBD, non-psychoactive, THC, psychoactive. And we're stuck in this fucking binary. Even now, the reason it's cannabis is prescribed is a delivery system. Cannabis flower is prescribed to you on your packaging. It's got two things: THC percentage, CBD percentage. Everything else is a contaminant. It just happens to have to be there. Then there's certain regulations under EU GMP that mean that it's got to be grown in X, Y, Z. Da, 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 da. Most of that is around packaging, mind you, and labeling. Um, but so the thing becomes this facade of this clean standard, and it, like we've described, it can't be. Our endocannabinoid systems are unique as fingerprints. They are. It's going to be discovered in the longest time. Like, what's the thing we're talking about now? So they've just discovered the thing above the endocannabinoid system. It's an interactive sort of modulating system. They call it the endocannabinoid, not kind of it's something you must have come across this term, endocannabinoid something or other. It's like a not for it's something that is bigger than the system, basically, that all of the CB receptors, the minor receptors and everything play into, and it's how it sort of
Just
interfaces.
general cell signaling as a whole. It's
Yeah,
all
but
super
it's what they're basically sort of theorizing or putting into practice now and trying to test of how then the endocannabinoid system fits into. So as you were talking before about the doctors, I've studied all of this shit. One afternoon, some crazy hippie came in and talked about an endocannabinoid system, but that's not real because there's no drugs. There's one drug, that's a T-Vex, and I've got no MS patients, so I don't need to know. So like, but what they're trying to do now is how to bring these two sets of science together. And I think that we're getting closer to the understanding of cannabis as a vitamin. And we need to look at it as a food thing. Decriminalize the food thing. Assume that everybody's eating it. If they happen to smoke it, they happen to fucking smoke it. If I was to shove a carrot up my arse, there is no regulation to stop that. That's not abuse of food. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's nobody's business. But you as government regulate the people that make the thing. I get the thing, and I can do what the fuck I want with it. I could build a throne of tinnies right now and drink myself to death with Jack Daniels. And there's no regulation, nor should there ever be any regulation that restricts that human behavior. We regulate the supply, we provide education, and we hope that the adult makes the best decision. And if they don't, guess what we do? We fucking help them. If you turn up morbidly obese at a doctor, and the doctor's like, well, I recommend that you lose weight, and you don't lose your protection, and the police come to your door and go, you've got KFC and it's not under license. Where's your prescribed? Do you know what I mean? But it is as
I
true and as
like the
absurd
analogy.
as all
Yeah,
of this.
very visual.
Like, substances, things are not problems. Things don't have animus. They're not capable of getting up and doing shit. Cannabis plant isn't going to sneak in the room and strangle your kids. Like, do you know what I mean? These are tools. These are things that can either be and are in the general sense benign, or they can be exceptionally dangerous. Anything can be dangerous. You know, I could freeze some fucking weed into an icicle and stab somebody to death with it.
It
Like,
is an odd conversation again, isn't it? Overall, it seems to be like a government approach to everything is like we'll target the object or the not the
because you can't regulate human
ground.
behavior, but then it's a misunderstanding. So, like you said, with the people that the kid going watch seizures, take this, no seizures, Can I have the thing? Cool. Like you said, the guy turned up, go, oh, my back. Oh, my this. Oh, I don't sleep very well. I've tried. Da, 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 da. We a lot of that is not what I would consider to be drug seeking behavior. As somebody that has that
No,
moniker
sure.
on their health records, that fucking bothers me. I understand your usage of the phrasing, so I'm not annoyed at you. I'm annoyed at its existence and its weaponization against individuals. Someone diagnosed with ADHD, like myself, going through investigation for autism. The false correlations. This brings us on to one of the sort of the studies that we were sort of talking about earlier about brain function outcomes. So I'll share this in the link for you guys below. It's brain function outcomes of recent and lifetime cannabis use. It's the JMA, JAMA. Can't remember what that is. It's one of the medical text things, medical journals, the network website that I've got it on. And something that's not accounted for, and actually there is a comment on here from the 29th of January, I realized when we were talking before, Chris, from an MD from the University of Nebraska Medical Center talking about that the data set is flawed because it's not taking into account cognitive comorbidities and psychiatric comorbidities like ADHD, like autism, like psychosis, and schizophrenic type disorders, because they'll self-regulate with these substances as I do, and one of the main reasons I use cannabis all day, every day, is the continuity and consistency it gives me of my cognition, of my sense of self, of my feelings, my emotional range. It's no different than exactly what they would seek me to be able to be on an antidepressant if I chose to take one.
Yeah.
It's like so we need to get beyond. There's so much of the hangovers of prohibition that mean that no, but because the doctors are a morality, they're the gatekeepers of the drugs. Heroin's this horrible scourge of the earth, but diamorphine saved my gran after a hip operation. Ketamine kills children at festivals, but it's a really powerful breakthrough medication for depression. Like, you know what I mean? Cocaine, this horrible, dangerous drug. Johnson and Johnson. Ketamine,
Mm.
we've designed this for anxiety. Ketamine for anxiety is a self-applicating drug. Like, again, these things can be true and right, but you can't then look at one group who are making the best of it. They're effectively in a war-torn region, managing to get water together, managing to crudely make fire and cook a meal. And you're coming along from your fucking Michelin star restaurant and going, you eat that. That's what they've got access to. Yeah, if you can then afford the treatments, I can get whatever I want. And it is the current system is then just it's a supermarket. Look, ooh, I'll buy one of these, I get one of these, get one of these. Some people get like 120 plus grams a month from these systems. And there's no worry about diversion. There's no worry about follow-ups because, like we said before, the doctor knows less than the patients. The patients are leading the doctors, which turns the doctors into just drug dealers. You turn up to your drug dealer, you go, he goes, what do you want? You go, what have you got? I want this, 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 and this. You pay him and you leave. Like, where's the accountability in the back of that? Where is the metadata sets that are being created from all of this consumption to help build a picture to support the science that you and I and many others know that there is not going to be continuity and consistency between cultivars and chemovars and different consumers because there can't be. You could extrapolate, like I said, just THC, put that in a product, and then get a base reading of the average amount of it'll affect X, Y, Z and then run that through your triple blind and all the rest of it, it'll still fuck up because the endocannabinoid system doesn't modulate that way. Other systems in the body are almost stagnant in a way that only respond to the stimuli upon it. Your nervous system, you like no, sorry, like the pain receptors on the nervous system are not really doing much when there isn't pain. Yet your endocannabinoid system is a modulatory system from reproduction to respiration. It's active, like I said, it's that modulating thing between the rest of the systems that we know about and have defined in modern medicine and biology, and what we're now sort of understanding of cannabis. And I agree with the carpet bomb analogy, but I also feel that if then that carpet bomb isn't actually destroying anything for the most part for most people, like you said, yeah, let them kind of do that. Observe from a distance. And then when somebody comes to the doctor in a non-prejudicial way, allow them to explain the issue. The same way a guy turns up and goes, you know what, mate? I just start there's a fucking Indian opened up around the corner, mate, and I eat like four a week now. Like being able to actually talk about it and understanding the relation of things to not just then blaming the individual and human will. That isn't me saying that everybody's free from what's the word, responsibility of themselves, but to understand that if you live closer to a McDonald's and you eat McDonald's, I imagine you probably eat more McDonald's than if you didn't live closer to McDonald's. And so the same is then true of all drugs and all things. So that people become representative of their environment and go back to the modulatory thing, that epigenetic thing. You can be one thing one day, and then through environmental interactions and changes, cognitive processing, physically your genes change. And this is what we see with there was a study from last year of King's College London, which isn't one of the ones I've geared up, which was talking about chronic cannabis use leading to DNA changes. And I'm like, everything leads to DNA changes. Everything's modulated. Like it's not stagnant and stationary. It's they bastardize the science to
Alcohol,
prove.
caffeine.
Well, yeah. Look at what do you see? What happened? What we talked about last week, folks. That I shared the link for in Callie's video was the Colombian president getting in trouble because he said cocaine is no worse than whiskey. The Spectator of all people. I'll dig this article out. The Spectator. Somebody wrote an article for them saying actually cocaine's probably less harmful than whiskey because alcohol kills more people than cocaine, and it broke down some of the stuff. It was a bit of a sort of snarky thing, but again, those conversations are happening in some quarters, and I don't then want to see what's going to happen if there's a episode of South Park. I think it's Medicinal Fried Chicken, where the KFCs get taken over by cannabis dispensaries in Colorado. So what happens is like the Colorado government go, okay, yeah, we'll let's legalize cannabis, open the dispensaries, but we're going to ban fatty fast foods in poor income areas, and that's basically
Mm.
all of Colorado. So KFC gets banned from it, and then it's the how this starts smuggling in like Pablo Escobar style. He goes to meet this kingpin, and they've got like KFC gravy, and they're smuggling that in, and they're cutting it with is it Arby's gravy or something, and it just shows like it's the argument I won my mother around with years ago. She needs 2 tablespoons, the big fucker, of coffee, black coffee in the morning to get her out of bed. And I was like, what if one day some dickhead came along and went, that's psychoactive drug, it's causing all this violence, da, 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 da. We're going to criminalize it. Would you go out and score that drug? And then she's like, well, maybe the. What if then the person you're buying that
Mm.
drug from sold these other drugs? And like, you can see then how you will self-justify if again all you have got in that blown out area in the war is what you've got access to in front of you. You're going to use what's in front of you. If you had the resource to go, well, actually, I'm going to go fly away to the Caribbean and we're going to have these infusions. I'm going to do some ayahuasca in South America and I'm going to da da da. Nah, if you've got then access to DMT and you're going to smoke it in a park, that's how's that any different than the shamans that are now air quotes, biggest air quotes of shamans writing in the Times or the Telegraph about their recent excursion to South America? Like, do you know what I mean? It's a supremacy. It's a colonialist mindset. It's a you. Who are you? You're just another magic talking shitting monkey like the rest of us. You don't have your authority. All authority is given or supposed to be from the collective. Going, we've put you in that position. Make the right decision. Then when we go, you've made the wrong decision. They just go fuck you. And for decades, we've done nothing. And now it feels like they're placating us because we're starting to prove it with the science. And they're going, medical, it's all medical. We're going to medicalize it. And the doctors are like, you were telling us for 50 years it's the most dangerous thing in the world. And now you want me to sign my career to it? I can
Mm.
understand the hesitancy and the need for these exploitative privatized systems for the industry to perpetuate in that way. What I feel is that we wouldn't need them if we had better social access. If we had the people that we've been locking up for years that really know cannabis and give a shit about it and also consume it, so they'll know and want to be mindful of what they put in the products, allow that to proliferate. And like to go back to my food analogy of or vitamin, if then you've got 2 options basically, you become vitamin deficient. You can either start taking the supplements and continue your lifestyle, or you can change your lifestyle. You may get a short-term advancement through both things, but the longevity of actually addressing the root thing versus then putting the thing on it is an entirely different approach. And at the minute, there isn't the thought of using cannabis as short term. These prescribers like, no, as much as you can have for as long as you want it. That I'm saying you should be entitled to, but the idea of a medical doctor doing that,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? It's these juxtapositions. So again, I'm not saying like let's tear back the system or whatever and remove the protections of those people. It needs reform so that that system is actually serving the people that have no other option. And then you create other options where those same people that are happily sharing on socials and making videos about their prescriptions and all of that stuff, they can be in a space that isn't clogged up with doctors and academics and science. Do you know what I mean? That's where the bespoke medication side of it is. And then over here, so yeah, let's look at herbology. Let's look at that then being medicinal, self-guided medical usage. And then allow that to be studied, that to be reported, allow there to be apothecaries, allow there to be institutions that provide these products and services that then create metadata from this to be able to complement the studies done in vitro and in isolation and in singular compounds to singular cells versus then these generalized popular studies. We need that spectrum of information, regardless of what you think, whether cannabis is good or bad in your head. Knowledge is always fucking good. It just is. So the more knowledge we can gather on this, I think the better systems, like you said, that we can design. But there has to be the stopgap for people. And to me, that's just decriminalize across the board. Fully decriminalize it. If then matey boys stealing the electric to grow 1,000 plants, do them for stealing the electric. If somebody's dealing and making loads of money, do them for tax evasion.
You're doing criminal behavior.
Yeah, yeah, actual criminal behavior outside of drug use. Like, fine, no criminalization ever for drug possession, consumption, or drug fucking, even I'd say petty dealing that isn't then the exploitative to make money from the like worsening of others' usage.
Mm.
And we can figure out those systems because we already have them in place with other things. Like when somebody goes and buys a cake or whatever, and like, brings it to you, you don't have to worry about, well, no, that cake was registered to me and it's my cake and you can't have any of
It
this
wasn't
cake. I'm sorry, it smells really good and yeah, oh, I'm loving this
root
cake. This
sugar.
cake is amazing. You haven't got the right piece of paper to eat this cake. It's as stupid as that when sugar is infinitely more fucking deadly and dangerous than cannabis. Like, it's just we're not consciously aware of how these things all relate to each other. And like you said, that we're so inculcated with this historic approach that we need a radical new approach. And it doesn't feel like anybody that's in any position is wanting to be radical. There's too much bureaucracy, too much red tape, too many people that would need to be accountable. And I don't want the system to be accountable for the actions of the people. I want the people to be accountable for the actions of the people. That's how we reach maturity. That's how we become fully fucking meaningful adults that can participate in society. Do you know what I mean? Whereas at the minute, everybody's just doing the wink and nod. You go to your doctor and he goes, "Oh, do you drink? Oh, I have a couple of pints, doctor." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, me too. How many? Oh, probably about 4 units. Oh, me too, 4 units." Go, "You smoke?" "Oh, well, I had the odd ciggy the other day, bro." We're all just
Mm.
lying and bullshitting each other. And the same like the Coke thing of people going hard on drugs, like the number of reform voters that haven't read the manifesto. Their dealer that's fucking sorting them, that's 25 to fucking life. You want life in prison for fucking drug dealers. Like it's in a fucking absurdity. Like we have this hypocrisy of going, well, it's not going to happen to me though, is it? We're so hyper individualized of going, oh yeah, punish them for what I do, as long as I don't get caught. It's the same thing we do with speeding. The vast majority of us speed when driving in some which way. Most of us will do it in a regulated and safe way. Like, oh, the road is quiet, it's dry. I'll have a little bit of my foot down. Like, do you know what I mean? They're not going to do it in a 130 mile an hour. Although I did read a story the other day about a guy getting caught at 112 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone in the UK. That again, it's if we don't. But my point that I'm long-windedly trying to arrive at here, sorry, is that if you leave it that there's this thing that we all go, yeah, that's bad, but we all do it. You create a space for people to then be like, well, what about all the other things? It's what we talk about with kids saying that, one weed will kill you. They have a weed and they go, actually, that was pretty good. Let's try this heroin. Because you've lost all credibility because you've falsely equivalated these things together. You've then lied to them. So they go, but you bullshit. Whereas if we had these rational conversations and rules and legislation around the potential harms of these things, but with an understanding that these things happen, surely society would be better. And I just think that if we go down the medicalization route, I can see within the next 5, 10 years medical cocaine, even if it starts as like the esketamine type. What's the cocaine one called? Um, Nov. Oh
Novocaine.
no, it's not Novocaine. No, they made a cocaine derived nasal drug.
Oh,
Esketamine was the ketamine one from Johnson Johnson, and it was Numbrino. Numbrino was the name of it. Fucking Numbrino. And again, they're billing that as like anxiolytic, fucking potential chronic pain disruptor, da 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 da. Like they're just pitching it full spectrum at whatever will stick that'll get it into the market. And there you go, there's lawful cocaine. And I don't want us to go through that route. If we're going to be like, look, drugs exist and people should be able to take drugs, let's create safe spaces for them, regulate those drugs to be the safest they can be, create antagonists and things to be able to like knock off fucking receptors, create spaces in case things people do have overdoses, problematic usage, etc. Use the sale of the money from the sale of these substances, these regulated substances, to fund the small number of people that would have a problem with them. That guess what? Already have a problem with these drugs. Same with alcohol, same with sugar, same with tobacco. Hmm.
You mentioned something earlier on, Simpa, about the overprescribing, perhaps that they maybe manage in other sectors. So to say as a safeguard for people that are potentially misusing it, or
There's a cap with every other drug. You can't just keep going back for diamorphine. You can't keep going back for benzodiazepine. Like the doctor knows, and he's like, no, your size, frame, your BMI, but like these little calculations equal this is the maximum dose.
yeah,
You can't then come back and self-report and go, well, actually, doctor, have you heard about like strain lockout? I hate that, but you know what I mean, the old parlance of strain lockout. I've got to have variety so that it doesn't, and like they can just beguile the prescriber almost. And the
mm,
prescriber, I don't know if there is then an incentive. Do the prescribers make more per
say
session
no.
of consulting if they're selling more? Is there that
Yeah.
sales model behind the scenes for them? I don't know any of that. And like I said, diversion isn't considered at all. About, well, I could quite easily, as a qualifying person, it's the same way of like you're the 18-year-old and you've got 17, I don't know, that's an odd number, but 17-year-old friends. You go into the shop and you buy the crates.
Yeah.
Everybody drinks.
Yeah.
Like I, because it's so highly, the potential for exploitation is so high. Not for abuse, I would say, in that sense, but the exploitation in that I've got it so I can drive safe. Like
It's a
I've got it so I can keep my job.
financially
I've got it.
prohibitive, not medically prohibitive. I don't think, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
the what's stopping people accessing it more readily would maybe be the financial hurdles at the moment. I don't know how stringent. It would be interesting to see from the clinics, and maybe they could publish this, what their turnaway rate is.
Hmm.
And I think I don't, and again, I don't know about all the rulemaking, but I think a disclosure of the statistics would be more valuable in terms of providing scrutiny, because then if a clinic's showing that 100% of prescriptions are given irrespective, that's obviously, well, I mean, unless you're the world's best doctor and you're just prescribing everything precisely and you've got the world's best patients
Hmm.
that come in and exactly need what you're prescribing, I think there's a, I don't know if maybe that's the best way to start trying to ask for a bit of scrutiny. And then those that do publish their, I think what would be great would just be a transparent all around clinic that publishes everything
Hmm.
without obviously incriminating their patients, but as a way of ruling out that over prescribing and some of the scrutiny, because I think there'd be a lot of data there that they could give away that wouldn't necessarily be all that revealing.
I mean,
But
how much are they regular? So if you think of then, I always just draw it back to any other drug that's already in the existing system and compare the regulations and compare the approaches.
mm,
And if a do I mean, it happened. We lived through it, multiple phases. I mean, we're similar ages, so our parents' generation, they could get ephedrine like nobody's business. It was just every fucking where. There was a base variety of amphetamine available in all these diet supplements. It was a big fucking thing. It was like the housewife's helper of our generation. They then cracked down on that, and they used
mm,
the NHS mechanisms to basically just go and audit it and go, well, this guy has prescribed this many of this. This is this is this is this that this to that number. That's quite fucking problematic. There's some obviously diversion there because that dose would kill this person. Like it's does that exist within the other space? Because I feel like because they're detached from the health service, like yes, there's certain guidelines they have to adhere to, but as you say, so many of these things are so brand new. Like, are there nice guidelines for the ketamine infusions?
Well, I know there's a lot of loose. I know. Well, a lot of those private clinics overall don't have the same scrutiny that the NHS does. I think that's one of the caveats that they're pretty open to talking about, and there are a lot of conflicting interests when it comes to private medicine and healthcare overall, despite all of the test measures that are put in place, let's say, and boundaries to make sure that doesn't happen. But I'm just thinking overall, like, I think big scale, large paradigm for people is, I think there's the perception that if a drug is licensed, therefore it is the most effective, or it is the best, or it is a truly impactful compound that's produced from all of the other compounds that are out there, let's say. So that legitimizes this one exact formulation. And I think going back to what we were talking about, the personalization and the uniqueness of every compound, I think that's maybe where again, extrapolating everything, that's where a lot of our weaknesses are in our medical infrastructure, is that it doesn't massively account for all of the personalization around the diseases, and we don't necessarily look into the diseases as much as we do the drugs that we're giving. So we can know everything about a drug and its efficacy and the pathways it potentially uses to improve the symptoms, but we don't necessarily always understand the disease we're treating as effectively.
Hmm.
That makes sense. So although cannabis is working, we don't necessarily understand the endocannabinoid system in all of the diseases that we're treating with cannabis. So
Hmm.
we don't really understand like what we're targeting. And going back to that carpet bombing, it's like non-specific. We're targeting that whole piece of land, not
Yeah.
specific people in that piece of land, for example. And I don't know if there's definitely a new model or a hybrid system. Going back to what you're saying there about comparing and contrasting some of the benefits of the other systems that are out there for other drugs and interventions, I think that's where we as an industry need to say, well, look, this is, we can regulate ourselves in a way by being transparent, but also demonstrate the efficacy of our service and the quality of our product. But I think going again, another sort of point that I was hearing you allude to, Simple, was maybe the end goal of treatment as well. Like, what is the goal here for the cannabis treatments and the cannabis that we're prescribing? Is it to reduce all drug use and get back to being a healthy, functional human, or is it to create an ongoing consumer who consumes more and more and more and has a greater dependency on that medical product, let's say? Overall, general goal for health interventions is to get you back to whittling off baseline. But I think a lot of, again, at mass, our medical interventions don't necessarily encourage you to whittle off the drugs and the drug intervention. It seems like it creates a further dependency on, say, or you need to take this for the rest of your life, for
Mm.
example, in the case of um, blood pressure medication, or say blood thinners.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's another conversation the clinics need to have, is like, well, okay, going back to the transparency element, this is our turnover. I think we're going to end up coming out with a nice model for this and put it by the end of the conversation anyway, or by the end of the week. Here's how many we're turning away as an indication that we're not serving everyone who maybe doesn't need it. And then what are the health outcomes for the patients that do come to us? Do people find as though they don't need as much after a year, or are people then consuming ridiculous amounts? Have we got one patient that's consuming all the cannabis at the company or through the clinics?
Hmm.
If a clinic did that, I think it would stand out enormously and assert all the credibility that could be given in that sense. And I don't know if it's got nothing to do with the best strains. It's got nothing to do with the best, um, let's say, best THC levels or the best supply chain, etc. It comes down to like who's actually transparent with what they're saying. And I think that ethical credibility at the moment is what the industry is lacking, because we can't say, oh yeah, going back to these articles that have been in the news this week, nobody looks particularly good in this conversation. I wouldn't say the clinics have particularly bestowed themselves with any great grace. They could have brought out some epic data to justify all of this. They could have put out some exceptional reports on, okay, well, you are using it in these cases. Here's all the data to back up why we're using it, for example. This is the traceable health outcomes of patients that do use our service. And maybe there's limitations there because they don't want to be seen as marketing, but I think overall, if they were even having to submit that to the regulatory authority and it's analyzed independently, I think that's what our sector needs now, our industry needs. It doesn't need any more of these, like, I don't think it needs any more promotion. It needs to start demonstrating its legitimacy and transparency and ethics, because that's what's under question, not the science of cannabis or the medical potential, but it's their
business practices.
Honesty, essentially, and credibility is what's under question. And if they're not prepared to provide those numbers, or maybe don't yet have the numbers to present, I think that's what, as our sector, again, speaking as a industry member myself, that's what I'd like to see from the clinics. That's what I think would be useful. The current systems don't do it justice. Even if you get a drug through the clinical procedures, I still don't think that necessarily demonstrates anything particularly. You've gone through the financial hurdles, you've demonstrated no one died, you've demonstrated efficacy, but such a small fraction of the drugs that get tested get through, and then a large proportion of those drugs also gets taken back. So you've got, like, of all the drugs that goes through the clinical procedure in the four clinical stages, let's say, preclinical through to licensed, only 10% get to the end of that. And so if you've got billions and trillions and hundreds of thousands of patients and patents and reports and bits of science and data and intel and IP potential, only 10% of that gets through, and of that 10%, a certain amount gets recalled. And then on average, that costs a couple $100 million to get there. Is that the most, can you say that's the most medically legitimate drug for a patient to solve that problem? Not always. I'd say just because you've got a treatment doesn't mean you've got cures necessarily. So we're good at creating treatments, but not cures. And I'd say that's another caveat to the whole just general medical conversation as a whole, and why cannabis is getting the recognition it is, because none of it's gone through that clinical process, but it's got most of the efficacious data and the best possible sort of results. And scientifically speaking, it's a pretty incredible new drug class, or ancient drug class, that we're now rediscovering. And does that necessarily mean that it's less medically viable or useful than a licensed medication? I don't think so, and not necessarily. So again, I don't necessarily think that just because a drug's licensed, that particularly means anything in terms of, like, where it stands in terms of actual therapeutic use. But I guess it's more repeatable and demonstratively repeatable. But again, we can see a lot of most of the treatments, I'm saying a lot. Most treatments don't cure people of anything. Some do, some help. There are useful initiatives, but for the most part, efficacy of drugs is about 30 to 50%.
Well, even then, it's because of, like, placebo, nocebo effect, and other modulatory effects of consciousness. How you took that drug? Did you trust that doctor? The smells of the room. Did you eat that morning? I know this is going to sound mental, but in terms of then how you receive that data, in terms of in that moment, is important to then how that treatment will impact you moving forward. And the element, I think, in cannabis that nobody wants to fucking talk about is it's a euphoriant. And it's something that I noticed when I first, like, when I hurt my fucking jaw. It was like, I didn't notice I'd really hurt it too much, because I'm taking a constant analgesic. And then I kind of was like, some of it doesn't feel right. One morning I was like, instead of all right, going through my usual, I'll give it a couple of hours, see how I was. And it just continued to get worse and worse until I arrived at a baseline of being like, okay, that is actually a problem. But in terms of then, you will feel better. Anybody that cannabis gets you high. And it's this whole module. I keep using that thing again. I'm not meaning to lean on the same word, but it seems to work the best. But like your consciousness modulates the impact of how you consume cannabis. So people that consume cannabis in a lawful region tend not to get paranoid because there isn't a consequence to them doing it. But in your own fucking home, and you suddenly go from da da to da, and the police could come knocking, and somebody could raid, and who's that, and what's that, and oh my god, because there's consequence to you doing the thing, so it changes the effect of the drug. It modulates the impact of it on your system. And nobody's wanting to talk about this. That it's the same with if you were the argument that the prohibitionists make. Oh, if we prescribe beer though, well, yeah, at a certain amount, it is an analgesic, it is a suppressant of X, Y. It'll have certain benefits, and I've championed this before, even as a non-drinker. The concept of medicinal alcohol, people with social anxiety that will drink one or two drinks. The first drink helps just take the edge off. The second one is to hold as a prop. Do you know what I mean? Same with many other drugs is the reason we now know that ketamine is therapeutic is because for some people it was therapeutic, for some others it wasn't. It doesn't mean that like the binary nature of our language is stating that well if this is medicine and medical it can't be the other thing, and this is where we're so
Yeah.
fucked with everything is it's language because for generations and for different iterations of governments, of business, of political approaches, of economic strategies, they've weaponized language so that nobody knows what anybody's talking about when we use the same words. There's different intentions and meanings behind that, and everything's just got obfuscated and broken down. So when the guy in the business suit representing the multi-conglomerate from America goes, "We're here for the patients," people go, "Oh, they're here for the patients. You're right. Yeah, yeah, they're going to help us." Like, do you know what I mean? And then you see them the next year and with the Rolex and they've got the fancy shoes and they're all in the thing and go, "We're helping the patients." You're like, wait, any of you lot being helped this year? Like, do you know what I mean? But it's the piss in your face and tell you it's raining. Like everybody from every side of any power and authority, because all anything is doing it. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's to not go back into the conversation we were having before we started. But that's the mechanism I fear. It's within the blueprint of humans. I could become a viscerally greedy, vicious, horrible person. Any of us could. Do you know what I mean? It's within us to regulate ourselves, to grow within ourselves, to learn empathy and sympathy. Granted, you're born with these things, but you've got to nurture that like a muscle. You've got to train it, otherwise it'll atrophy. And I think that again, these drugs are beneficial, but there's so many other aspects of it. You tripping on MDMA, or if you want to call it tripping, you high on MDMA in the woods with like five of your friends. Yes, the MDMA is having a very positive effect, but it's facilitating so much more. I think of the octopus studies where they give them MDMA, and octopus notoriously antisocial creatures because of their mating habits and rituals, because of the way that they patrol their swaths of land and area, kind of similar like wolves and that they have patches and whatnot. And the fuckers would seek each other out. They would seek to be near each other, and then they would reciprocate movements and shapes and forms. They were mirroring. Do you know what I mean? And so much of what we've observed in cannabis is somebody being, "I'm alone and everything's horrible and I can't get to anything." And then you suddenly go around the mates and they're all having a laugh and the joy and you're smiling and you're like, "Yes, mate." Do you know what I mean? The cannabis, yes, is helping. But the socialization, the acceptance, the getting over your own self. I'm not a druggie. I'm not a bad person. Like, do you know what I mean? We are the a huge thing that
We are the
affects whether,
machine.
yeah, we
Yeah.
are the modulatory thing so you can have all of this stationary stuff in the drugs and the research and have all this so-called stationary stuff of this construct of society and the zeitgeist of culture and all the rest of it. But you change everything. There's who is it? It's one of the fucking Jamaican dancehall singers. I can't think of who the fuck his name is. One of the lyrics in his song is like, "I'm not in prison. It was only my body." Like it's you can be in a situation, but you can choose how you like react to that situation. You can either go. It's the modern parlance, I guess. So this would be the meme of the guys on the bus. and it's two guys on a bus. One's looking out the window and one's looking at the rocks, and
Oh, sure. One's looking at the light side, the other one's looking at the gloomy stuff. Yeah, yeah.
100%. And so when you've been called a druggie by your parents, you've had your job threatened, you have to be scared of the police, and the magic piece of paper comes along, and you're, I'm a patient now. I can go into and say, oh, Mr. Barman, I'm gonna go consume cannabis outside, and there's nothing you can do. Like, I'm not saying that everyone's acting in that sense, but the you've suddenly gone from being like all of these to then this thing, and I'm a patient, I'm safe, I'm one of the good ones. Do you know what I mean? So that's going to have a huge impact on your mental health because all of a sudden you're safer. It's like you're consuming in Amsterdam again. Granted, yeah, the cops are still fucking don't know shit. The courts are still big and bollocks, and there's all the issues as we alluded to earlier. But conceptually, in your own mind, I'm safe now. Like, and so that is a huge part of prescription cannabis is that you are safe. So you go safe now, and so this is where it's been this weird thing of
Mm,
so you were saying about the strategy of the business model, and I think that as we were talking about pushing doors and going into rooms, they've moved away from getting new people onto cannabis in a lot of ways because that takes so much to convince somebody that yesterday thought it was the most dangerous drug in the world. I kicked
yeah.
my son out of home because he smoked weed at home. I saved his life because otherwise he was going to be on crack. Like those kind of people, you're trying to target them now, like versus the actual cannabis people who were just like, mate, to be honest with you, I just don't want to get pulled over and lose my license. I consume anyway. Like the clinics know
Yeah.
90 odd percent, according to one study, of them are fucking smoking it when they're not supposed to. Like it's, I feel they're not going to release that data to surmise all of this into my concise retort, as it were. Is that it's that Upton Sinclair quote I keep referencing, the English writer from the 1900s. 1900s, that makes it sound so weird. The 20th century. um, that you cannot expect a man to understand something when his salary is contingent on him not understanding it.
Mm,
So they their business model is contingent on them not understanding what they understand, if you know what I mean. If they had
yeah.
to then put all the data together and look at it and go, it appears we're just selling drugs to people that already wanted weed. Like, I'm not saying that is the whole thing, but from what I've seen of the amount of people that went from legacy into medicinal and are now either championing that in that realm only or are sort of skirting the between or whatever, that's what a lot of it is. And like you said, that the kids, the 8-year-old, 9-year-old that can't go and meet the dealer, that can't just go and have their own autonomy and do all that, that's ran then through the parents. And the parents have got the extra layer that you don't have as a consumer, as an adult. That if they go to prison, who the fuck looks after that kid? There's so much more to this than just
Yeah, yeah,
like
for
I
sure.
want to be taxed, not northern taxed as in robbed. That's not what I fucking mean. I want to pay tax into a system of some form that means they don't pay for their shit. That kid isn't lying to their mom and going, "Mommy, I need the weed because it makes my brain better." No, it's observable. There's no potential for exploitation, so fucking give them it and just put a little bit of tax on the other fuckers. Make your rec market. Like I've been advocating for forever as I pitched to fucking Jeremy Corbyn, like make the NHS sell weed. But get an element of a company, private, for profit, make it grow and sell fucking weed. Create the therapeutics, prescribe them under this side, and sell out the other door to your GMP standards. And then 10% of that, 20% of that literally pays for and subsidizes all of the cannabis access within the NHS. So those kids never have to fucking worry. So that when every time I roll a joint and I'm like, oh, there's a kid getting better because of me. Do you know what I mean? Like it. Whereas what?
Yeah, that's a good point, Simpa. Going back to sort of how we started. Intractable.org.uk,
Links
if
in
you
the
want to
below.
support all those families that are having to go through that painful process, you can donate to their cause where they help families with the costs of their prescriptions. And then, secondly, Seed Our Future. I know the website's down at the moment.
He'll be back online shortly.
It will be back, but make sure you're following all the Seed Our Future pages because this is my closing thoughts to the industry. It would be so beautiful to see So more transparency from the clinics and those that are producing it. Where are you getting it from? How much does it cost you? I mean, you don't need to reveal all the secrets, but I think that would make
The
the
things that
clinics,
impact your health, at
it
least.
would make people think more in depth about what they're actually sourcing and prescribing to the patients. Transparency on the data around who's being accepted in, who's being turned away. Are those people then able to come off the drug treatment so their quality of life markers coming out better? And then I'd love to see all the companies and clinics that are advocating for patient access and patient rights to support the intractable charity who are actively helping families pay for the cost of these medicines and maybe make a pledge, 1%, something beautiful like that. And then do the same for Guy Coxall and Seed Our Future, who we all contribute to, who put time, hours, years of their life into making sure the patients of these private clinics aren't being unduly persecuted or prosecuted by the criminal system. Because while we're talking about all this and we're talking about suppliers and clinics and what they're prescribing, even if you follow the rules, go through the prescriptions, follow the processes, and do exactly what you're told, it still doesn't work. And there are patients that are then persecuted in their living spaces, potentially having their kids taken away from them or threatened with that. Jobs taken away from people, insurance that they can't get, getting pulled over, getting put in cells despite having prescriptions, and police forces haven't yet caught up with this. All of the stigma still exists around cannabis, and all the people that we say we're trying to help aren't being helped at the moment. So best things you can do that would support all of this if you have got fired up or a bit passionate about it, like we have. Intractable.org.uk, make a pledge, and then Seed Our Future, help those guys out. They're cleaning up all of the undue harm and what would we call it, Simpa? What is the word? It's persecution or discrimination against all the patients that have legitimately followed the processes and are still getting mistreated by the system that they're following and the rules that they're following. So that would be my final conceptual thoughts
No, I think that's
after
good.
our discussion, Simpa. But I think that would be a pretty good, like, we know what the solutions are, don't we? At the end of the day, we've built things, organized people, proposed the ideas, you've written about it, podcasted about it. But that's what would be the next impactful wave of things, and then start advocating for the decriminalization of your fellow citizens. I think.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that can't access that private clinic process, and nor should they have to.
Yeah, there's it's attributed to different people, so I'm just trying to think whose quote it is, but that whole thing of like service to others is the rent you pay for your space on the earth. I feel that these first wave of cannabis patients that are not the children, you have an intrinsic obligation and you are made into activists, whether you like it or not, and ambassadors to conduct yourselves in a certain way that helps further champion your cause being prescription, but also one that doesn't besmirch, there's an older word, and, lessen the legacy of the people that allowed you to be there. You will suffer now so that others don't have to suffer later. And it sucks, but also with the greatest of respect, that's what legacy has been living under and continues to live under. And we need to find that synergy. And I think the transparency doesn't just need to come from the clinics. I think we as consumers need to be more honest. So I would call on patients to, where they can, admit if they smoke it, admit how they use it, admit what they really think of the system, because that's the only way you're going to get meaningful changes for yourselves, and it's the only way that then others can start to hold them accountable. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. I'm quite mindful of time here, but I did want to ask you, selecting from the pre-selected stuff that we had earlier. I did want to talk about RFK Jr., man, because he's made some shitty comments that have annoyed and frustrated me quite recently. Obviously, on the lead up to the election, was basically talking about like psychedelics and was a bit quiet on cannabis, but it was kind of inferred that the cannabis was attached to psychedelics and, novel medications and alternative therapeutics, etc. He was asked just before he was, what's the word, approved, sworn in as human and health and human services secretary. Um, he would defer to the DEA on descheduling and rescheduling, which annoyed me. Really, really fucking annoyed me given his historic stance and everything else. But then recently he's come out basically saying that cannabis can have catastrophic impacts on human health, and he's worried about sort of the current systems. Although he does the only nod really that's positive. I'll share the article for people below from Marijuana Moment. Is him talking about at least that it allows for studying to take place in the state level, if not at the federal level, because of the obfuscation of the bureaucracy. But the one of the things I wanted to talk about, and this was something that I think would be an interesting conversation for us. I can have to be quite quick. Is he states within this article that he's been in recovery for 40 years, 40, and still goes to 12-step meetings. Should people that are in that addiction, because that's what it's become, they've stopped drugs and become addicted to this other concept and all of the other things and the totems of their ideals go into this structure, be anywhere near the conversations about these things? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's helpful to have the people with lived experience in there.
Agreed.
And I'd say as well, in the wheelhouse that he's now in, Mr. RFK, he's probably talking more from a public health perspective, which, if using current zero harm reduction public health intervention in terms of education, guidance, and safety, which exists for alcohol badly, but is there. Without that, I think it would potentially, if we're just saying widespread, go smoke what you want, smoke as much as you can, smoke it all the time, smoke it all the day, that is definitely going to be bad for people. And that would be the stupidest way to go about it. And so I think he's having to walk a bit of a fine line of people. He's got the stigma attached now of you're an addict. So I think he's got to go do the 12 steps, though it's helpful, but also because he has to, so as not to be smeared as an addict. How do we know you're not taking drugs still? I think that's going to be like cynically what many people's perspectives would be. But advocating from a little bit further, he's got to speak more politically minded and be a bit softer on his talking points. But I think ultimately the same from what I'm seeing and from what I've read and all of his work thus far is, if it's in the realm of the scientific community, it's got a lot more scope and potential to be incorporated into a smart, effective, and health-focused industry solution versus if they just went, oh yeah, straight legalization tomorrow, because you know what it'd be like. It'd be the classic, with all the love in the world, America's very gung-ho with things. I think that would just like give the people, whoa, let's go 420 blaze it all over the place. And I think that's obviously what they want to avoid as well. And I think if they did go for that approach where they just went straight cowboy legalization, you don't want people to smoke. That's fundamentally the harm I think he's probably talking about. And then secondly, what are they smoking and rolling it with, and how are they consuming it? Cannabis itself is very safe, but it's the stupidity around it. And I say the stupidity, it's just the lack of education and knowledge around it. And because cannabis is so new to the legal sphere, without that, I semi-agree with him on the public health perspective. And for him, it's very hard to convey a whole public health harm reduction perspective. And well, actually, if you just educate people and give them good materials and help make drugs more of a educational, ongoing community conversation, it can be very safe. But I think what most people that aren't clued up on the conversation would appeal to is like, oh, he's saying just give drugs to everyone, which is the opposite of what he's saying. And I think that's why he's maybe slightly changed his tack or course on how he's talking about those things. But overall, I'm pretty optimistic about the whole appointment. And overall, it is down to the DEA to say enforce, but ultimately the DEA listens to what the scientists say. And so if the scientists can then come back with some nice data, oh no, DEA, you can't do it. Here's all the data and research.
Until
optimistically, I think that's where the opportunity would be. But overall, I think there's a bit more talk about a federal acceptance and the federal national levels being a bit more tolerant and communicative, and the states having more say in what goes on federally and especially within their own state. So I think overall, slightly same direction, but just a bit more staggered and a bit more metered, because it's got to align with everyone else's agendas and the time focuses and what they're working on. So I don't think we're going to see any big shutdowns or any big catastrophic redirects and we go back to a feudal hardcore prohibitionist stance, because that's the opposite of what most of those people sort of stand for and appreciate. And they don't want people in prison. They don't want big government shutting things down.
I think
they want to be there to support and help and provide good guidance, again, from what I'm seeing and reading. But obviously, as we've seen, you can have the same data, but then the one thing happens, and that's spun out into like 15 different trees of what's actually being said. And so I found that some of the speeches that I've been listening to from all of these new cabinet appointees and I guess non-new politicians, like they're not traditional politicians, but I think they're speaking a lot more wholeheartedly to the population as a whole, rather than making the usual noises that politicians make on those issues. So yeah, I'm incredibly careful of any article that's made a derivation of a speech, or like honestly, the Ukraine, anything war related, politically related, I enjoyed watching the live speeches on both sides, honestly. And then what I enjoy more is seeing how the media just chops that up into all sorts of different, whatever they say, whatever they want to say about whatever has been said.
Yeah, both sides have got to, they create.
Which is bad on all fronts. It doesn't help anyone. So I'd say, arguably, maybe media is more of a harm to society at the moment with this bad information. But
media is infinitely more harmful than drugs. Even like it is. If you have to take things on the collective sense, that even if fucking like you watch TV and it doesn't fucking kill you, but you took an overdose and you died, like it's still the way that things scale out. Like things are harmful because of the approach of what has happened. Things are then less harmful because of then other approaches to them. The issue I've got with this is the same thing with fucking Russell Brand. It's the same with any of them. They haven't dealt with their addiction. They've just stopped drugs and gone to a supreme. I stopped drugs. I'm mint. Fuck you. Like it's like fuck you. You had a problem. Other people don't have a fucking problem, and others that then do might need support. But sobriety isn't going to be their fucking answer. So I feel like what he's doing with this is going to be like, no, you're allowed the drugs, but medical only, medical access only. And it's going to create that two-tiered system. That's the get out of jail free card. I think what they're going to do, if you look at the support for Ross Ulbricht and the Libertarian Party in America, is they're going to use the states' rights laws to basically get the best of both. They're going to go, okay, we're going to put it as Schedule 3 federally so that we can bring up all these companies and build this network and take over the world globally for cannabinoid regulations, while internally allowing them to have a libertarian attitude if they can consume it as they want within those regulations, but we make all the money from it. Whereas I think the rest of the world is moving towards the paradigm of just medical only because the conglomerates that have already sought power are very fucking powerful, and they just turn up in a country with several million and just buy a country, and they go, oh, we're going to do medical and industrial hemp, and then we're going to do da 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 da, and it's the same playbook by the same people, and they allow it to stall out. Then the big boys come in, buy it out, conglomerate, da da da. I just worry that the speeches of freedom, but the actions are of enslavement in a way. They don't liberate us. They speak to the spirit of us. It's in the verbiage of revolution, but it's in the action of repetition. Like, just because they're doing and saying all of these things, the outcome is still going to be the same at the end. They're richer, we're poorer, we have less rights and access, they have more. Doesn't matter what color it comes in, doesn't matter what speech, what guise, if it's allowed to arrive to that point in policy making. And the idea of, yeah, like, if people were to go 420 blaze it and whatever, I would welcome that because that would be a genuine reflection of society.
Yeah. I mean, overall, commenting on that specific bit of wording, I think that's what he was referring to. But in the end, I don't see, like, with how many bits of policy and executive orders are being signed at the moment, there could be one next week on cannabis decriminalization federally. Like, I honestly don't think you can.
You can't rule it out at this point. Enough crazy
No,
shit
no,
has
no.
happened.
I've never seen so many executive orders. I've never seen this much of a politician doing anything as on TV. Everything he's come about it as a true American businessman, entrepreneur, smart-minded, knows how to promote.
Smart-minded.
He's doing all the pillars of entrepreneurship. Basically, it's a bit of a masterclass for any politicians that are, I think, watching him, thinking, "Oh, why is he doing that? What's he doing that?" He's making a show out of everything. The whole thing's a show.
The TTV politician, he understood how to crack
his own narrative, which I think is very clever at the same time, just interesting to watch personally. But
he's like a Reagan 2.0 in that way.
Yeah,
he understands how to entertain, to hold the gaze. The eye gaze there, not the gaze as in gay people.
Yeah. But I think with him being a businessman, that only bodes well again for cannabis anything. So
I hope so that he can discount the sin and all the other bullshit, and they just go, "How much? All right, let's make it." And then over time, we can figure it out. I truly believe if we liberate the people, yeah, we'll fucking go excessive for a while, as we do with anything. But we'll balance down into shit. Best practice. We'll start to regulate amongst our communities. We can start to lobby politicians, build groups, organizations, entities, create fucking academic data. Create scholastic pursuits in terms of degrees and educational forums for people to really get aware of this, champion that in the community. It has to be bottom up. They can do all of their shit, but their shit is not going to work if the majority of people are still just like, we're out and plant the plant. Like, do you know what I mean? We can complement each other rather than be competitive to each other. I'm never going to try and be Aurora or Canopy. Why would I ever? Who was got that interest? If I could, I would like to grow enough that would then maintain me a comfortable lifestyle, and I would have all I'd ever want.
I think everything we've talked about in terms of transparency, accountability, economic benefits, savings, being financially smart aligns with what the Trump administration's been elected on. So I think it would be incredibly stupid to go the opposite direction. And I think it aligns nicely with, like, it would put America in a great position internationally if they did it smart. They did it
if they became the global drug,
I guess America will end up doing it at some point. Like, it's a big strategic win, and if that's again strategy for putting America first, that would put America on. Well, that's a big domino or a big pillar. So I wouldn't rule it out. I think there's a lot of potential there, and again, for us at the core of it, the science all points in very clear directions for the most part. And so whichever government can try and fight the reality, fight the science, or just contradict it completely, but essentially the truth usually prevails, the information usually comes out, and people then demand higher standards and better information and better outcomes. So I think that's what we've got to look forward to anyway, Simpa. I think there's a lot of good things that can happen, and some exciting potential evolutions in the UK cannabis industry as well. So if you want to stay up to date, come to cannabissciencetraining.com, do our free training, and have a whole team of cannabinoid science help you navigate the future and the unknowns. But otherwise, yeah, thank you, Simpa.
No, it's been a pleasure as always.
Podcast, the best source of information, frontline perspectives and views. So
the ramblings of a madman. Either's good.
You got a busy couple of years, so I think it'll be pretty insightful, and I guess it's just the start, really. We're only 5 years in, so there are 10, 20 years plus of cannabinoiding to be done. So
Yes.
as it unfolds, we'll be commenting and podcasting. But yeah, thank you, Simpa. I think as of everything that's been going on the last couple of weeks, I think we've done a good summary there, and you've highlighted some good points and been a great spokesperson for the patients that are getting screwed on the day-to-day basis by the outdated regulations. And just, we've got a system, it doesn't work for everyone, it works for some, but not many people that are getting screwed have the same voice or influence or any way of sort of having their concerns heard. So thank you to you, Simpa. Thank you to the charities, Intractable and Seed Our Future and Guy Coxall. And yeah, great stuff, Simpa. And if you want any more guests from anywhere or people to speak to on anything cannabinoid related, we've got a nice backlog of people nice army of passionate experts that would love to have a chat with you as well. So
nice. I'm going to try and intersperse some sciencey stuff and some quite like more constructed podcasting amongst my usual ramblings as well, just so that there is some information going and it isn't just effectively my weekly therapy session, as it were. But yeah, appreciate you
taking up for Patreon. That's what you need to be doing. Support the cause.
If you choose to. But yeah, I'll include links below, brother. I'll let you get off and get on with your day. This will be out later on this afternoon. I'm going to turn this around. But yeah, thank you for taking time, man. Take it easy.
Legend, Simpa. Thank you. Take it easy, mate.
Peace and love.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Well, there you go, folks. That was Chris Tasker. We enjoyed that conversation and learned something new. I was trying to be a bit more sort of structured with this because of sort of the knowledge that Chris has and the relevancy of some of the news stories. We didn't actually touch on all of the things that I wanted to, but we did a few of them. I'll include some links to stuff below. Some of the other things are not necessarily too time pressing. They are quite recent, but I think there's maybe more bespoke guest, or I think it would be better to maybe try and align some of these stories with guests that have an expertise or an experience or some sort of insight into them, rather than just bombarding guests with and this sort of questions. But yeah, I thought that was pretty good. I wanted to it was the fourth question on my list here, but we just got so sidebarred. Was to talk more about sort of synthetics. That is something that a few people have commented on. Was going to discuss with Callie Seaman previously, but we ended up on quite a tangent about sort of harm reduction, about other drugs, about comorbidities, not comorbidities, what do they call them? Sorry, contraindications of taking various drugs and how they can affect different enzymes and whatever else in the body. I know we didn't get down to quite that nuance of it, but I really wanted to make sure that we were sort of pushing that kind of information so that people were a bit more informed. I think a lot of harm reduction education these days is very censored online, so it doesn't get to a lot of people. So hopefully that got into the right ears. No doubt, obviously, we're getting Callie back at some point. And yeah, we'll do a bit more on synthetics with her, if not with one of the guests that Chris Tasker has kindly suggested to me. So we'll see what's happening in the coming weeks. Like I said, any of the articles we've discussed will be in the links below. Please do check out Intractable and Seed Our Future. The website should be back up fairly soon. Check out Global Cannabinoid Solutions and CannabisTrainingScience.com, I think is the new website is. Yeah, hope you've enjoyed this. If you've learned something, if you enjoyed it, please do give us a like, a share, a subscribe, thumbs up, a heart, or whatever it is you do on your platform. Show appreciation. I appreciate it and appreciate you. Yeah, if you really enjoyed this, check it out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee, you can help me keep the lights on this little project of mine. Check out simpalife.com for a back catalogue of Weed World articles. I'll be uploading some more content to that soon. I'm just a wee bit buried under with hemp gardens and another project that I'm working on. So yeah, please do give me time. But yeah, hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with somebody. Be awesome. You'll love it. I love it. All right. Peace and love, folks.